record. Okay, we'll call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of council to address items from the public hearing. Ms. Lohr.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 1 are bylaw numbers 4214 and 4215, 2011, the text amendments to the C4 City Centre Commercial Zone Density Provisions. The recommendation is that 1, Council gives second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam's citywide official community plan amendment bylaw number 4214, 2011. And
Moved by Councillor Sikora, second by Councillor Asmundson. All in favor? Whoops.
Whoops.
Councillor Nicholson hits his button just at the moment.
Just in time.
Just in time.
Okay.
Councillor Nicholson.
My apologies, Your Worship. Are we dealing with these one at a time? There were
yes.
a number of recommendations.
The first is, sorry, I'll go back. The first is second, third, fourth, and final readings to the citywide OCP bylaw.
Thank you.
Later? Okay. Second, third, and fourth on the OCP bylaw. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
2, that Council gives second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4215, 2011.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Nicholson on this item.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would propose an amendment to continue adding to the language of the motion, to continue Council's present policy by allocating 25% of the land value increase at Step 1 to the existing Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and directing staff to include consideration of the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund when reporting on the City Centre Community Amenities Fund.
Okay, and I trust you've provided a copy of that wording to staff.
Well, I emailed it, and I have it here for later if necessary. And I'd like to go ahead and speak to that, if I may.
There's an amendment on the floor. Councillor Nicholson on the amendment.
When this item came for first reading, I referenced at that time the fact that in 2008, when we first created the C4 zoning, we specifically allocated 50% of the value increase at Step 2 to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and the balance of the increase in land value that flowed to the city to a to-be-determined community or city centre amenities fund. The language of the bylaw as it was presented and as it got first reading ignored the specific allocation of funds to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and had the entire value increase in the several steps now proposed in the C4 zone to the still to be defined City Centre Amenities Fund. This motion directs eventually that amenities fund be created, staff establish it. I'm glad to see the amendments to the C4 zone. I think the opportunity for increased density at several steps and to maximize the benefit to the city, to the ratepayers, to the community of increased density in our city centre. We're getting the greatest value as well out of the ultimate hoped for transit improvements that we're all expecting. I think that's very important. But 3 years ago, Council made a very conscious and specific decision to support affordable housing by providing the funding, yet to determine how best to use that funding, but we have to build up the fund to a point where it's enough for us to do something with, to come up with our maiden Coquitlam solution to solving the many problems of affordable housing. It's not as simple as saying subsidized rentals or anything like that. There are a great many other solutions to be found. Our city has gone a good distance in the steps it's taken so far, I think that we need to continue on that road by continuing to provide the funding that we set aside earlier. I recognize that times have changed. The challenges for the city continue to change. And I'm more than happy to have staff come back, when they come back to talk about the City Centre Community Amenities Fund, to have them perhaps make proposals as to how to appropriately fund affordable housing. But for now, it's not the time to change what we established 3 years ago. That's the effect of the amendment that I've proposed, and I hope it'll gain the support of Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rasmussen.
Sorry.
Okay, anybody else wants to speak now that Councillor Rasmussen's done?
Thank you. The clarifying question through to staff is, or through to the proponent of them, is we're talking about the density bonusing portion of the lift in a value, but you're mentioning the land value. It's the density.
It's the lift in the land value.
The lift in the value of the density for increased density that we're talking from. That's what we're talking about, above what is presently allowed within the zone. Splitting that difference of
the land value increase is the language that I used, Councillor, which is consistent with the language in the table in the report.
Councillor Rasmussen.
The question is through to staff. Is that consistent with the language that's specified in the density bonus provision?
Your Worship, first the measure or the amount is the land value lift. And so in both the C4 density bonusing system we have now and in the proposed one, we've approached it on a 0.5 FAR increments. Yeah. And so currently the bylaw is there's a variety of density bonusing abilities, and so there's this one piece that at that time came in, and Councillor Nicholson is quite correct, that was on the basis that half of that 0.5 would go to affordable housing, the other half to community amenity fund. The amending bylaw now would change that to many more steps, starting earlier with a greater contribution, not just 50%, but starting at 75% and then declining down.
As you go up.
Yeah, but again, in the 0.5 FAR increments. So that's the difference between the existing bylaw, C4, density bonusing, and what's proposed here. I'm not sure, does that answer the question fully?
That sort of does. And I guess the other question is, going back to Councillor Nicholson, we did make a commitment to put half of the future density bonusing or land value aside. And so why was that not written within this document? I understand the motion. I understand it coming forward. I'm just seeking clarity. I'm just saying that we did make a commitment to split off amenities and affordable housing. How we deal with that money for affordable housing in that area is for another report to come to us and what we're going to get ourselves involved in. I spoke before about our concerns about how we deal with this and taking on downloading from the province and the federal government. So I support the motion. I'm just trying to find some clarity. I'm trying to find out the other reason why it wasn't included in the C4 zone as part of it.
Your Worship, I can try to respond on that. You need to recognize it's not just the zoning bylaw. That's the one tool, but the other critical tool is the official community plan. Because under the Local Government Act, we can have a density bonusing scheme on our zoning bylaw, but you need to have the policy framework or basis in your OCP. You just can't go willy-nilly and put these density bonusing systems in your zoning bylaw. There has to be some overarching policy directions. So in there, you need to have the policy, broader policy statements. It's for the purpose of community amenities, affordable housing, transportation improvements. And you need to sort of identify what you're collecting the money for. And then the zoning bylaw is actually the revenue generator, if you will. It's like kind of like the tax rate bylaw. But what's missing, and what we had indicated with our earlier reports and reiterated now, there needs to be council policy around the allocation of those funds that are so generated. You've identified generally what they're targeted for in the OCP, but then it's council policy as to how those funds are then allocated to meet those needs. And so that's the piece that's been missing.
So then the other question is this amendment proposed amendment necessary within this C4 zone that we're presently doing, or is that already inclusive of what councils have directed to be done? If you were to do the C4 without including as this change or amendment, would it still be council's direction and still be collecting the money and putting 50% into affordable housing?
Your Worship, that's a difficult question to answer because it's a matter for council to decide on. But if I would say, I'm not sure that the allocation percentage belongs in the zoning bylaw. That's not really the proper place for it. But if there was supposed to be, if there's direction though from council to carry on or to allocate as per the existing bylaw, if that's council's direction, we will obviously follow that.
Well, that's my concern, trying to clarify that, and I thank you for that, because if we already have policy or can develop the policy, that will direct where those funds go, but we don't need to put it within the actual bylaw, the C4. So that's what I'm just trying to get clear here. So I think I've gone down this line. I think maybe some other people have some further insight on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. 3 years ago, I'll just repeat what I said 3 years ago. I had great difficulty with that bylaw, that, you know, a certain amount of money was going to go to affordable housing. I've got the same problem today. The problem is very, very simple. You have a pot of money. It's supposed to be affordable housing. Who do you give it to? The city certainly is not going to be building affordable housing. It's not our mandate. Neither should we. Okay? And who are you going to give it to? To a developer that's going to build a 24-story high-rise and have him put 4 units on the top floor as affordable housing? I don't think it'll happen, not ever, because there's a strata council that's involved. So, you know, there's many, many, many things that really bother me on this one. So who are we going to give the money to? Can you imagine having, say, $10 million? You're going to give it to Boza and Ani and Polygon, and everybody else will be screaming their head off. How come not us? The one thing that should happen is the federal government years ago used to give tax breaks to the developers that developed rental housing. They have to do it again. I don't think for 1 minute that we should be taxing our people out of their homes. My taxes went up $350 from last year to this year. You know, and I've talked to many, many homeowners that their property taxes gone up $300, $400, $500 in 1 year. They can't afford it. They cannot afford it. How many more times are we going to be doing something that is going to jack up the taxes? We gave 2 properties away this year or the last couple of years. One of them on 3030 Gordon, one of them 526 or 528 Cove Lake. Now, I think Coquitlam's doing a pretty good job of that, and the taxpayers are doing a very good job, not giving us any hard time as far as giving their land away for affordable housing, whatever it is. You know, in Ontario, Mayor, in Ontario, if you just go back to Ontario, every city has taken on the provincial government role and the federal government role. They're building social housing, affordable housing. They have no money for infrastructure, none whatsoever. They can't build sports fields. They can't build any parks. They can't build anything to do with sports or anything else because they haven't got any money. They can't replace their pipes on the ground that are starting to leak because they have no money, because they took this load on. You know, and here's the situation. I don't care. Here's the situation. Can you imagine we need a park or we need an ice arena, swimming pool, a soccer field, baseball field, and that type of would say, no, we don't have no money for any of those items because we're going to build social housing. I don't think it's our role. And I'm really, really concerned, where are we going with this? Because even if we do come to some grips with it, you're going to have the biggest battle in your hands when it comes to who you're going to give the money to. It's not our city role to do it, and I'd like to hear from the manager on that.
Well, oddly enough, the manager has had his hand up for a couple of minutes, so Mr. Steblin.
I thought I would just highlight a couple things that have changed in the last year. And I would suggest that perhaps council would want to keep some flexibility in this regard. The first thing that we are doing, we just earlier today discussed the whole affordable housing strategy, and council suggested we refer it on and have a good discussion later in the fall in terms of exactly how to approach those kind of things. And so we don't know exactly how we would spend the money right now, and so when Councillor Sikora highlights some of those things, I can identify with some of those issues, and they were real issues in Ontario. But the other issue I'd like to highlight is that there are many more civic needs that have been identified in the last couple of years that are presently unfunded, and the exact plans for those have not yet been finalized, but we do know that the needs greatly exceed the available stream of revenue that we can foresee. So council just may wish to keep some flexibility in that regard. Council can still allocate at a later date to whatever project it wishes, whether or not it's affordable housing or some other project. But I can assure you that there will be many needs before you that will have funding challenges, and you may want to keep some flexibility in that regard.
And precisely, that's exactly, Mayor, what I'm talking about. The fact is that, the manager's correct. The fact is today we do something and we don't know how we're going to do it. So let's maybe spend 4 or 5 hours or 6 hours discussing. Do I like to see affordable housing? Of course. I don't think there's nobody in here that wouldn't want to. But on what basis and at what expense in the city? Is it a one-sided kind of deal? I mean, am I going to build a whole bunch of affordable housing to where everybody from the other municipalities could be moving into Coquitlam, saying I can get affordable housing in there, so I'll move into Coquitlam? Is that what we're all about? I don't think so. We're a city to provide the services for all the taxpayers in this community. And I think we've done our share as far as giving away some property, and if another piece of property comes aboard, and there's going to be some kind of housing built by the provincial government or federal government, I'd love to look at it. I'd be the first one to look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I won't support the amendment. And I'm a little edgy tonight that Mr. Burpee and Mrs. Burpee, whom we all hold in very high esteem here, came forward to speak about affordable housing. But this bylaw isn't just about affordable housing. This bylaw is very important to us right now in our town centre core, to have the lands that we have ready and to allow us to get the lifts on all this density bonusing that we get. What we need to do is first figure out how we're going to collect the money. Then it can go into an amenity fund, a pot, and it's up to us around this table to figure out how we spend it. And tonight is not the night to figure out how we spend it. There are lots of things coming up, and this afternoon we had a meeting on affordable housing, and as I sit at Metro on 2 of their housing corporations and the housing committee as well, there are so many things I've brought up down there, and you start talking about affordable housing and how needy people are. Well, let me tell you, a lot of the apartments that Metro Vancouver has for rent are rented by people that shouldn't be in them. They're earning far too much money. They should be gone. If we could get rid of some of those people, then we'd have vacant affordable housing for those people that really need it. This issue is so huge. There is now a whole consortium of people who have formed a group, and they're going back to the feds to sort of say, look, we need help. We need tax incentives for builders to do it, to start building. We need the government to put money in. Maybe the government would come up with some matching funds so we could use it for home ownership, a fractional home ownership, which would be a very good place for people who are at the higher end of the low-income housing, so that they could move into something they own, and every time you move someone out, you have room for other people to come in. There's so many issues. This is such a huge issue. This is not the night to be discussing how much money we're putting into affordable housing. This is the night to create a way to get the money to be able to put into any kind of amenities, and affordable housing being a big one. I don't think anyone and I sit at Metro and I look around at what they've done, no one has done quite as much as we have in affordable housing. We've given our land, our taxpayers' land, for lease on several big parcels, and I know this council here that is here at this moment, we're all supportive of affordable housing. So it was said a few years ago that we were going to put 50%, and that maybe that's what we're going to do. But there's things I want to ask. How am I going to put the 50% in? What am I going to use it for? Am I going to match funds with a government grant? Am I going to give you more land instead of money? Am I going to give it to some society to partner with them to build? You know, there's so many questions we have to answer. Most of this lift is going to come from the town center area. Is this where I only want to have affordable housing? I don't think so. So is the money that we get from the C4 in this area going to just be for this area, or can I use it citywide? These are all questions that we have to answer. And this, as Mr. Steblin said, this is a long discussion for us all. So I will not be supporting this tonight. I will be supporting the C4 because I want to get the money in before I figure out where I'm going to put it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I agree with the bulk of what Councillor Reid just said in terms of all the questions. I think there's still lots of questions that we have about how to spend this money. Where I keep getting tripped up is when I look at the current C4 density bonus approach that we have, and it says at step 2, by council policy, this density bonus payment is currently evenly allocated between the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and the yet-to-be-established City Centre Public Amenities Reserve Fund. It says that right in this document, right before us. And then when we take a look at what we're proposing, there is no allocation to the for affordable housing. And until we have that workshop and can detail it out and hash out where that money goes, I think I would like to operate with that previous policy that says it's a policy on step 2 in our current C4 zone until we've had a chance to make other decisions. So I'm actually going to support the amendment because I think that because we haven't discussed it, I don't want to make any changes to that piece of the C4. I'm prepared for the lift. I want to do that. I want to capitalize on the opportunities before us. But I don't want to let go of this just yet. I want us to have the discussion. So I think it's important that we keep that in there.
Thank you. Councillor Lynch.
Thank you. And I agree somewhat with Councillor Reid that this probably isn't the appropriate time for having this debate. And I'm just going to digress a little bit because at one time when we decided we were going to have council meetings immediately following public hearings, the idea was it was going to be for non-controversial items that we're just going to move forward, and we weren't supposed to be having this discussion at the end of the long day or without having the time to have second thought in between the public hearing and the council. So I think we probably need to revisit whether or not this is really working the way that we planned, or we need to go to the process that we agreed upon, and that was everyone in agreement, non-controversial items, just deal with them and move forward. Now, I do agree that when we're going to have this this item that we're dealing right now with the receipt of funds and the disposal, I'm having some difficulty, though, whether or not we're talking about policy, what was previously policy, but what we're setting right now isn't policy, and I think that's what Mr. McIntyre was getting at. And while I remember the discussion we had before, and I agree with putting the money aside, my problem right now is where is the appropriate place to put that? It should be in the policy, not here. So I'm wondering, when would we then be having that discussion on the policy? Is there going to be a recommendation come from staff? Is that something that we're going to generate from one of our Wednesday strategic planning sessions? If I could have some direction on that, I'd appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. There was some earlier discussion related to having a housing-related or housing affordability-related discussion on a Wednesday. We have strategic a opportunity for a council discussion, a broader council discussion on one of those. And I think that makes a lot of sense to go that route. I don't know if staff took that direction this afternoon as well. And I think, are you comfortable with that then? Or
I was kind of looking for a bit of a timeline when that might be coming forward, if we do know that at all.
We did look at the schedule of Wednesday meetings, and we did defer. July is full already, and the June one's happening this Wednesday is full. The Wednesday one is reserved. The Wednesday one in September is reserved for the Four Corners visioning issue that we were talking about. And so at this point, we would look at doing it in the early fall, probably October.
So is it possible for us to move forward with this C4 zoning issue and then have, instead of having amendment, having subsequent motion in order to continue with the policy we have now in place until we have that?
I believe it is. I'd like Jim to expand on that, but I believe that that the way Jim described it to me earlier is that those decisions are in the policy that council has and don't have to be in the bylaw. But perhaps, Jim, you could expand on that?
Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm sorry, I wasn't clearer before that. And that's why I was getting up at when I was talking about the clarifying between the official community plan, that overarching policy, the zoning is the revenue generator, and the policy for direction. So, again, if and certainly we need to have that broader discussion around affordable housing. I think it was a good kickoff to that this afternoon's standing committee meeting. So that'll take place early in the fall when we can get to that. In the meantime, if there is consensus around the council table and direction to staff to carry on in ensuring that the funds that would have been received and directed to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund under the existing scheme, that same amount would come through under the new density bonusing. I'm sure we could do the math and figure that out. It's a modest portion of that overall density bonusing. What I would like to do is do that analysis and show council, but if that's the direction, we could proceed on that basis.
Okay, so then I think I'd be comfortable with passing what we have now before us without the amendment, and then having direction that we continue with the existing policy until such time in the fall we come forward with the recommendations from staff and the layout of how it all gets broken down. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I've similarly got concerns related to how that would work. I think that's a better solution than the amendment. And ultimately, it comes down, for me, it comes down to the fact that these kinds of charges, essentially development cost charges or bonus density revenues, are intended to cover the costs that are imposed upon a community, in many cases, by the development. And new development does have bring with it some needs. New development creates need for improved roads and improved transit, for example. New development creates needs for improved amenities in parks and improved traffic management processes. New development doesn't increase the need for new housing. It actually solves some of the need for new housing. It doesn't increase the need for affordable housing. Housing affordability is an issue in lots of communities, but new development doesn't make it worse. And so applying bonus density costs directly to a provincial responsibility because the money's there means we're taking the money away from the transit that you need, for example, to create a walkable, livable neighborhood and actually reduce the cost of housing. It makes housing more expensive in an effort to make housing more affordable for some, and I think that's a challenge that I've struggled with for 20 years. I was the founding chair of the Society for Housing Affordability, and we were challenged by those kinds of bylaws 20 years ago, or 18 years ago, when bonus densities were first proposed by Minister Smallwood, as it was back then. So I think I'd be concerned about that. I won't vote for the amendment, but I will support the idea that we could move forward and have a discussion, a good and proper discussion about how we move forward and continue the leadership that this council has shown related to housing affordability. Councillor Nicholson, second time? Or
if I may.
We'll let you do it.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to borrow from Councillor Sikora and say it's really very simple. The challenge that I'm faced with is that 3 years ago we established a policy. It's recited in this document. This is council policy as of 2008, and it's been applied since 2008. And when I go back and look at the similar report from 2008, that table appears in the report, and that's the only place it appears. I'm now presenting, instead of asking at the end of the day for an amendment or for an affirmation of council policy. I'm presenting these amendments, and I'm presenting the amendments because now I find the step table that doesn't mention affordable housing contained within the amending bylaw. And I'm told by some people that that's simply there for illustration, but it's part of the bylaw. It's acquiring a greater status in our legislative scheme than the previous table had. In effect, by passing the recommendations as proposed, Council, without, it's certainly not flagged in the report, but Council is in effect saying we're reversing the decision that Council made 3 years ago, and we're not going to allocate anything to affordable housing until we have another discussion sometime later on. That may be the decision that we make sometime later on, but I don't want to abandon a previous policy, a well-founded and a policy that I personally believe very deeply in, without a good, solid discussion of it. I acknowledge, the city manager says, yeah, we have way more civic needs. That's right, and the C4 bonusing is going to give us way more civic resources to deal with those needs. And the allocation I'm asking for that we retain for affordable housing is exactly the allocation that began in 2008. I'm not bumping it up. All the additional money flowing from the C4 zoning is going to flow to the amenities fund, and one day we're going to decide what the amenities fund means. But I don't want to, the phrase I wrote down here was keep your hand to the plow. We started down a road 3 years ago, and we've accomplished a bunch of things. We've done some real things, and we've built up the beginnings of an affordable housing reserve fund that we will then spend a whole lot of hard work determining how best to make use of it to relieve a whole lot of problems in our community. I don't want to abandon that. That's why I moved the amendment, and I continue to hope that it'll gain support. It gives away nothing. It simply retains the position that we previously had. Thank you.
I was hoping you were going to close debate, but we've got another speaker now, but I'm going to ask Mr. McIntyre, he apparently has a comment.
I won't comment on the motion. That's for council to consider. But what I understood a few moments ago in the back and forth with Councillor Lynch around what I took to be direction to staff, if the motion, the amending motion was not supported going forward based on what's there on the screen, but with the direction to staff that the amount of density bonusing that would have been received and allocated to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund under the existing system, that amount, that percentage, carry on under the new C4 density bonusing system. And that's the understanding of council, the consensus of council. That direction is very clear to staff. We can do that percentage calculation, and we can carry on until we have the workshop in the fall.
It doesn't change the document. That's the big part.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor.
Councillor Sikora.
The fact is that decision was made by the previous council. Wasn't this council made that decision? The previous council made a decision. So, do we hold, did they hold their feet to the fire? Not at all. I mean, we can change it. So, if we're going to start adding different things like we started here about a week ago into our budgets, that so much money goes to this, so much money goes to this, so much money goes to this, so much money goes to that. Why the hell, pardon my expression, have a budget? Why even carve out a budget? It's been carved out ahead of time for us. So why even sit around for weeks at a time and discuss what should be in the budget, what shouldn't be in the budget? Should we hire 6 policemen or 4 or 3, or we can't hire any because all the money's spoken for? I mean, is that what we're all about? And the decision will be made in October, and I'll tell you what that decision is going to be. You're going to have a headache. We'll be talking for 8 hours. We're not going to accomplish a thing. Because I'll tell you, this is a hard ball. It's a hard item to deal with. How do you deal with something like that? How do you divvy up the money? Who are you going to give it to? And why should the city get into collecting money for social housing or any kind of, we have a budget to carve. out for our taxpayers. And, and I like to see the council members, they're all for so many things that should be happening. Wait till fall time and get a budget that's 12-15%. Oh, but we have 50% of it for social housing. See how long they last in the next election. They'd be gone. They'd be gone like that. And that's the way exactly what happens. You can't go, putting money in a budget that's not there right now, or spend money that is not allocated and it's not in the budget. We wait till budget time. Let's discuss the budget time. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
That's on the amendment.
This was on the amendment. The amendment was to add specific language related to affordable housing. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment? All opposed to the amendment? I see Councillors Reid, Sikora, Lynch, Reamer, Asmundson, and myself are opposed. The amendment fails. The motion is on the floor unamended. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I prefer the amendment, but if I can't get the amendment, I would really like the staff direction piece. I think it's important that until we have had a thorough discussion, that at a minimum, I would like to maintain what we currently are doing in terms of practice until we can develop a proper policy. And if Council will support that as direction, then I can live with moving C4 forward. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other discussion on the motion without amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. That's item 1 of 4.
Item 2, bylaw number 4211-2011 for 307 Begin Street. Staff recommendations that Council give second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4211-2011.
Moved by Councillor Sikora, second by Councillor Reamer. Councillor Reid, Chair of the Land Use Committee.
Thank you. I know the developer is here, and I would like to thank him very much for the way he has proceeded on this application. I think it's been wonderful. But I do have a question to ask, and I wonder if he could probably keep pictures as you go, like some kind of a photo journal for us on this, so that we can use it in Millardville and other areas of our city on how to do the best heritage house restoration, and I would really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Congratulations.
Item 3, bylaw number 4207-2011 for 1401 Austin Avenue. Staff recommendation is that Council give second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4207-2011.
Moved by Councillor Sikora. Second. Second by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Reid.
I'm torn whether to approve this now or send it back to staff to get a whole bunch of wrinkles ironed out or gravel moved or whatever you want to call it, or if we can approve it now and staff will be able to deal with it again upon direction. So I'm looking to staff for some comments on that.
Your Worship, as mentioned earlier, the nature of this amendment to the zoning bylaw is not to approve the actual plan. It is simply to amend the zoning bylaw to allow the creation of a temporary use area for the site. Staff will have to look at specific details in terms of the proposal. We would look at all aspects of the proposal,
and
including
I
access.
understand that, but I'm also concerned that the gentleman that's renting the house has private access in and out of his house. I'm concerned that the neighbor across the street, we now have another access egress onto Austin, which isn't the safest thing in the world. There's the tree issue, there's all kinds of issues. So will you be able to deal with that on direction?
Your Worship, yes, I believe staff
Okay,
can take
that's
direction
fine.
on all those items. We've taken careful notes, and we're happy to look at all those issues as part of the temporary use permit application when it comes back to Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Having improved my understanding of this, I can support it at this point. I think it's unfortunate the proponents are no longer here, because I'd like them to hear what I have to say. and I'm sure staff will communicate it to them. We create a temporary use area, then they can come back and apply for a temporary use permit, which, if I understand it correctly, will mean public hearing again on the specifics of that temporary use permit. I have a lot of reservations about this whole process because it's quite clear from reading the documentation that the ultimate intention is to create a permanent parking lot on that site. It says that they will come back and apply for rezoning in order to make it a parking lot. We talk often, when we're talking about development in the Northeast, we have concerns about creeping density. I think here we have creeping rezoning. The neighbors, during the period of temporary use, will be in a state of uncertainty as to what's ultimately going to happen there. And so will the owners of the property. They know what they want to do. I think they should come and ask us for the rezoning that will allow them ultimately to do what they intend to do. I don't know specifically what our rules would be. If they were to come and rezone it so that they could use it as a parking lot and say, but we can't afford to pave it right now and we'd like to gravel it, would that require action by council, or would they be able to simply go ahead and do that? They're already carrying on in a non-conforming use, which we're cheerfully ignoring. That's my view. I would much prefer to deal with it straight up, straight on, deal with it once, and not have it coming back to another council in another 3 years or 3 years after that, or another renewal of a temporary use permit. We all know what they want to do. Let's ask us, get them to ask us to give them what they want, and let their neighbors speak up on that, not on this temporary use sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have those concerns. I think that one of our challenges on this particular site is that, and one of the jobs of council is to try to make those services that are offered in our city work better, and try to facilitate that. If it was a shopping center that needed to expand its parking because the current situation was untenable, it didn't have enough parking, we would try to facilitate that, I think. In this case, this is a church, a place of worship that I think is thriving. It clearly needs to address its parking. It is bundled in with absolutely no street parking, except for the street parking that might be a block away. That creates challenges. I think the neighborhood has expressed their willingness to work with this particular applicant to make it work, and I certainly appreciate Mr. Landgraf's comments in that regard, because I think it's somewhat telling that this is a good neighbor, and I think wants to be a good neighbor. I think the parking situation has been a challenge. I've been to that particular church on a few occasions for garage sales and things like that, and it's just it's hard to get into, and it's certainly hard to park at. So I'm somewhat comfortable with this process as it's been laid out, and I'll be voting in favor of the staff recommendations in that regard. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I'm generally in favor, but Councillor Nicholson sort of, I think, just brought to my attention this idea of why is it temporary and why aren't they just asking for rezoning?
Your Worship, there were discussions with the applicant around how to formalize the parking use. The discussions typically through the staff process are to obtain, a formal development of the site, if that was the case, which would mean dealing with a heritage building, paving the site, diverting a fair amount of funds into that development. We typically would look at some of those temporary elements with some caution because of the way that they're integrated into the community. The positive thing about the temporary use permit from an administrative perspective is that it allows the use to operate for a time. The community can see how it operates. If there's issues, that the use will terminate, and we can then have a look at that use in greater detail. Certainly, I take the comments from Councillor Nicholson. We had a lot of discussions with the owner, but we were concerned about the heritage building. We'd like to see the discussion around its retention, around how to integrate that. If there's a need for the parking to support the church, we'd like to see how that can be integrated if possible, and that was why we took the approach.
Okay.
This made sense from a financial perspective of the church as well.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other comments, the motion is a staff recommendation, second, third, and fourth. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4, bylaw number 4208, 2011, is a text amendment to the M6 Retail Industrial Zone for 277 Schoolhouse Street. Staff recommendation is that council give second, third, fourth, and final readings to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4208, 2011.
Moved by Councillor Sikora, second by Councillor Nicholson. And I'm going to express my concern on this one. I don't know, we are about to rezone the entire property, including the industrial buildings, into the office buildings. And I'm hesitant about that. I realize that there's an issue here with one particular tenant and one particular building. And it's a building that has traditionally been used as office building, but 90% of the floor space in that city block has never been used as office space and isn't acceptable as office space, and we're about to zone it to take office as an acceptable use for those warehouses. And I'm uncomfortable. I'm trying to find an answer in my mind. So, Mr. Alweva.
Your Worship, yes, unfortunately it's the legal description of the property. It's not the straddle, there's no stratification, so that is the specific property description. Because of the nature of the area, we're comfortable that this is not going to change the nature of that area radically. But that's something that's unavoidable in terms of how we can describe the property.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Reamer.
Thanks. I think I know the answer to this question, but I think I should just clarify. We're allowing this as an accepted use in addition to the other uses that are already occurring on the property, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Well, if you wanted to be specific, why couldn't it just be described as that portion of Lot A? I don't know why you can't do that. We used to do that all the time.
Your Worship, there are complications legally. Unless it's described legally as a strata lot, there's really complications in terms of the parking area for it. What do you actually describe? Is it the only building to the demising wall? So there's some challenges in terms of that. There are potentially the opportunity to limit the use through a restrictive covenant. It's one other means by which that could be done in terms of limiting the use further, if that was one of the alternatives.
And that may be the alternative we wish to do.
Yeah.
And that would stop instead of just describing that portion of lot. So we could do it by restrictive covenant. And I think, do we need to change the recommendation for that?
It would simply be through additional council direction on that.
Then I would think we give additional council direction for a restrictive covenant, just dealing with that particular building.
I'm going to actually ask staff, because we approve this, then there's nothing.
Yeah, so it would be to withhold final reading and then have the covenant in order before we grant final reading to the bylaw.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, thank you.
Is there another option, and that would be take the floor area here and say that that's 10% of the site that allow, and I know that there are zones where we allow up to 10% of the floor area in a particular zone to be office space, and establish that as the text amendment.
That's in the M9, yeah.
Your Worship, that's a secondary way that we could limit that, or we would have to actually rescind readings, I believe, and then amend the bylaw.
Yeah.
Either way, those are both possible alternatives. But I don't know specifically the amount of floor area that building represents relative to the entire lot. So there's some things we would want to look at as staff.
No, and I'm not going to argue whether we'd have to rescind, because it seems to me that rather than just allow 100%, we could allow a smaller portion, and that does tend to be more restrictive rather than more permissive, and I don't know that would, but I defer to your wisdom.
Your Worship, an amendment to density typically raises issues, whether you're
not more than
increasing or
3,000 square feet or something, or not more than 2.
Okay, and your recommendation at this point then would be to pass second and third, or defer?
Yes, I would suggest withhold final reading. We would then go back, and with direction to obtain a restrictive covenant limit the use to that particular site, and then we'd bring it back for final approval.
Can you speak?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Councilor
you
Sikora.
know, with me, I have a problem with this when I moved the reading up to fourth and final. The fact is that, you know, that building, I don't know how big the building is. And I don't know how much the charter accountant is using of that space in the floor. You know, is it the 10% of the building? Is it 20% of the building? Is it 30%? I don't know. Is it a small portion that's being used? So, you know, what we're doing here is saying maybe give it 3 readings and see what's happening and maybe adjust it. You know, I'm not comfortable with that.
Why don't we get from staff a description of the property, because it's more than one building. He's actually using 100% of the building we're talking about, but the property that we're rezoning is
You don't want to do all the buildings.
multiple buildings, and most of them industrial. Mr. Elway.
We'll put the plan up so you can see the building relative to the entire site development.
Well,
Okay.
but I don't think we need to do that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Just one building there
Yeah.
for a accountant.
Right,
And the rest of them would remain the way they are.
yeah.
That's fair enough.
Well, you
Okay.
would be able to.
I'm going to ask, if we'll clean this up. I'm going to ask Councilor Sikora for a motion that is second and third only. Is
Okay,
that
that's
what-
fine, sure.
Instead of? Second and third only, seconded by Councilor Lynch. The motion is second and third reading. Any other discussion on second and third reading? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. And we'll set aside fourth reading till we work out details with staff related to a restricted covenant or something.
Move to adjourn.
Councilor Sikora to adjourn, seconded by Councilor Asmundson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you all.
It's only been 9.
Go Canucks, go.
Well, I've now officially